I'm Nadia Taylor, Training and Exercise Manager for the Readiness Support Center. And this is Semper Gumby, a podcast about emergency management in the Corps of Engineers. We'll cover topics about disaster response and recovery, FEMA mission assignments, and Corps-specific response authorities under which we operate for things like flood fighting and coastal emergencies. Today we'll be talking about the relationship between the Corps of Engineers and the Emergency Management Accreditation Program, or EMAP. And we have with us today two EMAP subject matter experts, Werdebaugh and Ashley Leflore. So Linda, what do you do for the Corps?
Currently, I'm the Mississippi Valley Division Readiness and Contingency Operations Quality Improvement Program Manager.
All right, and Ashley, how about you? What do you do for the Corps?
I am an emergency management specialist for the Mobile District, and in that role, I'm also the deployment coordinator and the accreditation manager for EMAP.
So guys, to begin, let's just go over a brief rundown of what EMAP is. EMAP is actually an independent nonprofit organization. EMAP's mission is to foster excellence and accountability in emergency management and homeland security programs by establishing credible standards applied in a peer review accreditation process. Programs apply for accreditation and then provide documentation to show that they meet these credible standards.
Right. Usually what happens is EM programs will subscribe to EMAP, which means they have access to an EMAP liaison, peer reviews, and participation in development of the EMAP standards every 3 years. The program that subscribes is led by what's known as an accreditation manager, and they go through a long process of self-assessment. And that means they're making sure all their business processes are documented in line with the 64 EMAP standards. And depending on the status of your program, that can take from a couple months to a couple years. But once a program thinks they're ready, they upload all their documentation to the EMAP website, and they refer to that as the tool, and then they apply for an on-site assessment. EMAP then arranges for a team of assessors to come on site, and they go through all the documentation during what's known as Assessment Week. And at the end of that week, the assessed program will learn how many of the 64 standards they're compliant with, and they have 30 days to further address the non-compliant standards with supplemental materials. The report from that assessment then goes through the hierarchy of EMAP committees, and the ultimate outcome is the program's either accredited, conditionally accredited, or non-accredited.
Okay, so just to be clear, if you're sitting there listening and saying, well, how does the Corps fit into all of this? Well, the Corps adopted EMAP as its quality management system for emergency management and was actually the first federal entity to have an accredited site. That was Huntington District in 2011. Now we have more than 30 active programs. 7 sites have been fully accredited and 1 additional site is pending. And then this year, in 2016, we'll see at least 3 more sites apply for accreditation. And the Chief of Engineers has actually specifically identified EMAP and a target of having all districts and divisions fully accredited within his campaign goal 3A. So let's get back to the standards. What does that actually mean? What are standards?
The way I like to look at it is that we're a public service agency, so we have a certain way that we should be doing things for our partners and our customers. So just the same way that you would want the people who build airplanes you fly on to build them to a certain standard so that you're safe, as a public service agency, we should be doing our business a certain way to best serve our customers and our partners. So I look at EMAP and the standards just as the way we do business, but meeting a certain par or a certain level of how we do it.
If we adhere to these standards and we're actually speaking a common language with our local, state, and federal partners, we're going to benefit from going through these 18 different functional areas that cover items such as hazard mitigation, prevention, operational planning, communication, warning, facilities, training, all these items that encompass the entire emergency management program. And that's not just the emergency management office within the Corps districts. That's actually the entire commander's big program within his district. So it's beneficial in all ways. Honestly, it forces the documentation of the institutional knowledge. Obviously, within the Corps, we're going to have numerous retirements probably on the horizon if they haven't already happened. It also holds programs accountable for the items that they say that they're doing, because EMAP's twofold. You have to have, number one, the documented process and procedure that's stated in the standard that meets the standard. And then on the back end, you also have to prove that you're doing what you say you are doing with the proofs of compliance within your program. What I've also noticed is that it ensures the full circle completion of the corrective action process. So if you notice that there's an issue, one of your AAR comments in a training or an actual event, you actually have to follow through and incorporate those changes that you notice that need to be made in your program and actually incorporate them back into your planning process, whether it's actually editing your plan or changing documentation.
One thing to keep in mind when you're going through the EMAP process is that it's not meant to be anything new. Like when Linda talks about those standard areas, it's supposed to be part of the business that you're already conducting. So you already have laws and authorities, and you already have finance and admin. So EMAP is just forcing us to make sure we're actually following a standardized procedure within our program and across the Corps.
From what I'm hearing from the field, it's just documentation. I mean, it is, just like you said, Ashley, things are already there, but perhaps the documentation might not be there. But what is it like to get ready for an assessment? Tell me a little bit about that process and that documentation that's needed.
In that 12 to 18 month window, you're going through your every single element or every single component that we've broken the standard down into and making sure you're addressing those. So you're going through it with a fine-tooth comb. You're actually making sure you're doing things. If not, you're changing the way you're doing things. So it is a lot of editing plans, pulling documents together, writing your justification sheets. It's a lot of work, I'm not going to lie, but on the back end of it, seeing an accredited program, it makes a huge difference because we've had, a 75% changeover, I believe, in one of the programs that just got accredited, and because they had these actual documented processes and procedures, they've been able to carry on with their program very successfully.
And Linda mentioned justification sheets. That's something that the Corps has actually developed on our own as a way to help all the districts get ready for the assessment. The justification sheets help you explain what you have, and then we've also developed the checklist where you kind of go through and mark off different things that are required of the standards to make sure that you're 100% good to go once your on-site assessment occurs.
Yeah, breaking down the standards and the elements into over 300, or it's probably closer to over 400 components now. Make sure that you don't miss a word because each one of the words within the standard is actually evaluated. So it's a lot easier to find holes in your documentation. I was the first program when I was the accreditation manager for St. Louis District to actually run through the actual format that we came with. And there were holes, but we found them. And as seen now at the Rock Island assessment, the holes that I had found during my on-site assessment in St. Louis were addressed before the Rock Island assessment, and I think their assessment went absolutely well. It was so much better than mine. It was so much easier for the accreditation manager on my end because there's so many different little pieces that they didn't have to address because I made sure that they took care of them before, and it makes a huge difference.
So let's talk about the different roles, because you mentioned the accreditation manager, and then we also have our assessors. Let's start with an accreditation manager. What is an accreditation manager doing in a program?
An accreditation manager is responsible for ensuring that every single one of the standards is met. They're responsible for the self-assessment. They're responsible to ensure that the program is ready to go. They actually work with the EMAP federal project specialists and have weekly conference calls, and they should be the ones that are responsible for working with the district to ensure that every piece is there.
So then we also train assessors. Now, assessors are Corps of Engineers folks, but I understand that assessors can also be other trained individuals that come on site. So tell me a little bit about what an assessor is and does.
Right. The assessors are from all walks of life in emergency management. You'll have state, local, universities, and then federal assessors. And they're all trained at the training, like you said. They'll come on site during your assessment, and they're the ones that they're basically responsible for reviewing all the documentation you provide and writing whether you're compliant or not with each of the 64 standards. So they'll come in for a week with a team lead and the EMAP project specialist with EMAP, and they will sit in a room and look at everything you give them. And it's kind of a give and take relationship during that week. They'll ask for more information from the program, and they'll basically sit in there and decide whether your information is compliant or not.
So let's talk about that week, because when you as a program say, yes, I am ready, I have all the documentation, I have all of my proofs of compliance, which, oh, by the way, proof of compliance, you're talking about like rosters of attendance and exercise outcomes. I mean, what are you talking about proof of compliance?
Your proof of compliance is the actual document that you're giving to EMAP saying this is why we think we meet this standard. So like you said, it could be a training roster, it could be a plan, it could be an example of when you requested funding at one time. It's basically anything that you do within the process of conducting emergency management.
Okay, it's assessment week. You've got all of your justification sheets, you've got your checklist checked, you've got your proofs of compliance. As an accreditation manager, you think you're set. Tell me from an accreditation manager standpoint, what is that week like?
I'd say that the week of the assessment is a lot of anticipation. You're kind of just waiting for the team leader to come and ask for any additional documentation or any clarification that they need, or if they need to have an interview with one of the other functional areas within the standards, such as public affairs for your crisis communication planning or security for one of your hazards that you have to address. But it's a lot of waiting. And then once they finally start asking you for things, it can be a little nerve-wracking. I can tell you that in St. Louis, it was nonstop requests of items and clarifications. And, when you have a large supportive team, I think it makes a huge difference.
And accreditation managers shouldn't be nervous when they start asking. That is going to happen at every single assessment. Whether it's the core or another program, a state or local program, they're always going to ask you for more during the week. So that's a good thing. You want them to ask it during that week, not after. So it's a good thing to have them asking for additional information.
When the team leader or the assessor is coming at you with a question, you don't know if it's one of 64 standards. You don't know exactly which functional area they technically might be reviewing. So you're trying to figure out why they're asking you the question so you can actually give them what it is that they're actually looking for.
Why is that difficult to discern? I mean, I don't understand why they don't just ask you outright. I don't understand standard number 31. Where is an extra proof of compliance? Like, what am I missing?
Sometimes it's not that simple. As an example, the team leader came up and asked for the chemical, biological, nuclear, and radiological plan. And we were trying to figure out why they were asking for that plan. Well, it was listed as one of the hazards within the Integrated Protection Plan. Well, the Integrated Protection Plan covers all those hazards such as that, like terrorism or, So therefore, your Integrated Protection Plan is the plan that covers that hazard. You don't have to have that as a separate plan because you've identified the Integrated Protection Plan that addresses your terrorism hazard, which encompasses chemical, biological, nuclear, and radiological issues.
Okay, so one plan can count for a couple of different things, but it might...
If it's written that way.
Okay.
If it's written that way.
So then they just might not... I still don't understand why they just don't say, I'm missing something, where is it?
There are some standards that overlap with each other, and it could be that even if they told you that standard, you would still need to be trying to think ahead, what else would that impact? Because, like she said, if they're asking you for one plan because it has to do with one hazard, well, then there may be 5 other standards that relate to that plan that then you're going to have to think ahead and think, what else are they going to need from us, or have we covered our bases on all those things?
Well, then on the flip side, what is it like as an assessor going into these programs? Ashley, I know you've deployed a couple of times. Well, maybe deploy is the wrong word, but you've been to several assessments as an assessor. So tell me a little bit about that experience.
Well, first off, I'd just like to say if anyone is an accreditation manager, they should try to get on an assessment because it's an eye-opening experience. You're actually getting to see it from the other side, and you're sitting there reading through the documentation and having discussion with the other assessors, and you see from more than one perspective why something may be compliant or non-compliant. So it's a great experience to have. It's also a great week because everything comes to fruition so quickly. You see these programs that have put 18 months to 2 years of work into documenting their program, and then you're going through it in 1 week and seeing whether it's compliant or not. So it's a really neat process to go through. But the actual week is basically you meet on a Sunday, you meet your assessors. There are usually people you don't know. There may be 1 or 2 other core people on the assessment, but you start Monday morning. They'll brief generally the commander and kind of explain why they're there, that they're not there to tell you how to do your program, but just to evaluate against the standards. And then by Monday afternoon, you sit down and you start reading and you start typing. You're reading every document that was provided for each of the 64 standards and then writing up, almost similar to the justification, you're writing up an explanation of why they're compliant or not. And that by the end of the week, that becomes a report that gets sent to the EMAP Program Review Committee and then up to the EMAP Commission for a decision.
Well, when I went to EMAP training, I remember vividly one of the images during the training was this bookshelf with just like binders and binders and binders of printed stuff. And this was hailed as the end-all be-all. This is like the holy grail of bookcases for EMAP documentation. And then a question was raised during the training like, well, that may be in 1989, but why can't we just do this electronically? Why can't you just give us, a whole bunch of links or something? So what's better from an assessor standpoint? Do you want a bookshelf full of 20, 100, 1,000 pounds of binders? Or do you just want a bunch of links and electronic documentation that way?
To be honest, it's my suggestion to have both because your assessors are going to be different. You're going to have different backgrounds, different styles of working. So the best bet is to have electronic and paper copies. And I know the image that you were talking about where there's a whole bunch of binders, and it gets bigger than that. I've seen districts that have 5 of each binder. So you have 40, 50 binders all together. But to be honest, you've got 5 or 6 assessors in that room all going through different standards at different times, and that one person may need to see a plan that 2 other people need to see at the same time, and it's to your own benefit to provide those paper copies just to streamline the process and make it more efficient. So personally, as an assessor, I like to have 2 things pulled up at once. I'll have their justification sheet and then the plan where they say they have met compliance. But I won't lie, there are times when I'm just not seeing it, or I don't see it in what they provided, but I think it might be in that plan somewhere else, so I'll pull up the paper copy of their plan and flip through until I find it. So it's just to your benefit to have it in different formats for the assessment.
So we talked about accreditation, conditionally accredited or non-accredited. So at the end of this week, do programs automatically know if they're accredited or not?
When the assessors leave, they do a final brief out, the team leader does, and they give you a rollout. Actually, Thursday afternoon on the final out brief for Thursday, they'll give you a layout of how many standards you're compliant with, how many you're not, and actually what pieces of a standard you are not compliant with. If you're not compliant with, say 75% of the standard, most of it, there's maybe just a little piece that they need later on. So they will know by the end of that week what additional information that they're going to have to work on. And then Monday morning, the EMAP Federal Project Specialist will actually send you a new supplemental tracker that includes any of those missing pieces that you need to work on for the next 30 business days. So the program will have 30 business days to submit any supplemental documentation to meet those additional standards that they didn't hit the first time around at the on-site assessment.
And it won't be a surprise. You'll know throughout the week. Each afternoon, the team leader and the EMAP Federal Project Specialist will meet with the accreditation manager of the program and kind of discuss where they are, which standards they've gone over, which ones they haven't even looked at yet. And so you'll know as they go through each day which ones are problem areas. So by the time you get to Friday and during that briefing that generally includes your commander, it's not a surprise. You'll know what you need to do going forth. And then that form that he sends you on Monday kind of lays it out so you know exactly what you need to provide.
So then at the end of the 30 days, the extra 30 days, that's when you are either one of those 3 statuses, accredited, conditionally accredited, or non-accredited?
No. You will know what standards you are compliant with. So far, what I've seen is they've been 64 out of 64 at the end of those 30 business days after the on-site assessment. However, I believe there are programs that have not still met or been compliant with 64 out of 64 standards, in which time you'll be invited to the program review committee meeting. It's usually held in April or October. And at that time, you can actually make your case to the program review committee if you are not 64 out of 64 to say that you're compliant with all of them. And at that point, after they vote and meet, after you present your program, even if you're 64 out of 64 after the initial assessment, you still go to that meeting. You still have to present your program, and they will vote after you present your program. And by that Friday, you'll get a phone call. Actually, the commander will get the phone call saying you're accredited, conditionally accredited, or not accredited.
Okay, so it's at the end of that meeting. Regardless of when your assessment week falls in the calendar year, it's at the end of whenever that meeting happens twice a year.
Right. And Linda actually brought up something that I think is important to share with everyone, that the 64 out of 64, at the end of the assessment week, that's not normal. If you hear someone is 64 out of 64, they did an exemplary job. So going into the assessment, I just want you to understand that you may have 63 out of 64 or 62 out of 64. That is fantastic. That means you did a great job at documenting your program, and you just have a little bit more. So you should actually expect that there's going to be a couple areas that will need just a little more attention before you can actually become accredited.
Right. That is a very, very good point. It's uncommon.
So then what is conditionally accredited?
Conditionally accredited is where you have some areas that, like I said, still need attention, but you weren't able to revamp those or provide what was needed within those 30 days. It may be a standard area that you just can't fix in 30 days, such as training an entire group of people. Some people may not have the time in those 30 days. So what EMAP will do is give you a conditional accreditation, which gives you 9 months to address those areas and then provide the documentation that's needed to prove that you're compliant. And then they'll reassess your accreditation status at that point.
If one of our programs comes back as non-accredited after one of these committee meetings, what does that mean for our program? Do they just start from scratch, or do they continue to pick up where they left off on those things that they are just not meeting?
That's one that, the way our federal project specialist with EMAP explains it, it's very rare that it occurs. Especially when you're going through this process, you're not very likely to actually get to an on-site assessment without being somewhat close. You would just have to completely bomb it to be non-accredited, and then I don't think that's going to happen within the Corps because we already have standards that we reached before EMAP came along. So if you were non-accredited, I believe there's a period of time in which you have to wait before you can go through the process again, but it's not like picking up from scratch. You're already going to have that work that you've done up to that point, and you would just continue on from there.
Yeah, I think within the Corps, I don't think that's going to happen. We've had enough programs that have been accredited and enough people with enough experience that I can't see that happening at all.
Yeah, we're building a team really as we go through this. There's so many people now that you could consider experts in EMAP that have been through the process. There's a lot of people that are willing to help. And I know as an accreditation manager myself, I pick up the phone quite often asking questions or asking for examples. And so if you're concerned about that, just pick up the phone. There's lots of people that can help you around the Corps.
Yeah, and typically at the EMAP training, you make a lot of contacts if you didn't have them before, and you recognize faces of people that you know are going to be going through the same process together. So I think that's the other thing, too, that with Mississippi Valley Division, where we have group phone calls every week. So if somebody's having a problem area, we can bounce ideas off each other or, be able to work through it together and have some guidance that I can provide. And I'm trying to address stuff at the MSC level to make sure that the districts are already covered when they go through some of these functional areas, just to make things easier on everybody.
Yeah, that really is the trend right now. I know we're doing it in South Atlantic Division too, and I've seen it in others, and it really does help guide you through the process because you'll have districts at completely different levels of what they consider themselves, the percent complete towards EMAP, and it just helps bring those people along with you, and you guys can achieve it together.
All right. Well, thanks, guys. Is there anything we missed I know that EMAP is not a fun word for a lot of communities within our community of practice, but I do think it's very beneficial. It can be very beneficial, just as you ladies said. But is there anything else that we need to kind of go over or parting lines?
I just think it's important to remember that, like Ashley stated earlier, we're all doing most of these items. Yes, it's a lot of work, but what I found it makes things easier is to use what I like to call the out-of-emergency management box thinking. There are functional areas that are being carried out throughout your district that you may or may not be aware of, but if you find items that your district's already doing that actually meets a standard, it's easier to find something that your district's already performing to meet the standard than to try to create a process and additional work that's unnecessary. So talk to everyone within your district, your program, make sure it's a programmatic effort, and it's a lot easier to go through this together.
Yeah, it's great not only to seek accreditation, but this process is great just for the EM professional as a whole. I know I was in the Vicksburg district prior to the RSC and now Mobile, and this has been a fantastic way for me to learn the Mobile district. I've talked to so many different people from planning, engineering, and operations, and they're teaching me about this district as I document it for the EMAP process. So it's just a great process to go through, even if you're not looking at it as the end result being accreditation. It's just great to go through the program and learn it through these steps. There is one thing that I did want to say. A lot of people may dread the EMAP process. I've heard a lot of people mention the saying, it's fitting a square peg into a round hole, because they feel that maybe the EMAP standards aren't what we're used to as the Corps, or they may not word things in certain ways that we're used to. And it was a real eye-opener when I went to the team leader training at the EMAP headquarters in Lexington. I was in the class with people from universities and state and local programs. They all feel the same way. It's not something that should make us dread this process. A standard is a standard. It can't be specific to each program because then it wouldn't be a standard at all. So it's something that we need to work ourselves up to. You may find a standard that you don't think fits your program. It may be something you don't think you do. EMAP's not telling you have to do that. EMAP is ensuring that that is done for the people we serve or the partners that we work with. So for one example is like donations management. We don't do donations management. EMAP isn't saying we have to do that. They're just saying make sure it's done in your jurisdiction. So I just wanted to say that's when you're thinking it doesn't fit the Corps, it really does. We just need to look at it from the Corps' perspective, not from EMAP's perspective.
Well, thanks, guys. Let's wrap it up here. I just want to say once again, Linda, Ashley, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate your expertise and your willingness to talk with us about EMAP today.
Thank you, Nadia.
Thank you.
That's all we have for today's episode. Thanks for joining us, and we hope you've learned something. Please subscribe to our feed and check back for future episodes. I'm Nadia Taylor, and this is Semper Gumby.